story opens with a man arriving to discuss something serious, something that clearly carries weight. Moments later, a group of guards escort a female prisoner into the room. On her uniform, the code Seatwo 150 is clearly visible. The man wastes no time circling around the subject. He tells her that there are very few people in the world who can arrange freedom for someone locked behind prison walls. Luckily for her, he happens to be one of those rare people. But of course, freedom does not come without a price. He explains that some extremely valuable items disappeared some time ago, and if she agrees to help recover them and return them to the person they belong to, her sentence will disappear along with the prison bars around her. Then he finally reveals the name connected to the search, Tewksbury, and just as that name lands, the screen cuts to black. From there, the story jumps forward by 1 full year. The dark, miserable atmosphere of the prison is suddenly replaced by the warmth of a beautiful church. Sunlight pours through the windows, decorations cover the place, and all the guests sit quietly, waiting for the wedding to begin. At the front, the groom stands with a smile so wide that it looks impossible to make it any bigger. But there is one very obvious problem. Too much time has passed, and the bride has still not arrived. The guests begin shifting in their seats. Whispers start moving through the church. Some people are already beginning to suspect that she may not come at all. And who is this missing bride? None other than Enola, our sharp-minded heroine, who is currently dealing with an intense wave of panic. After everything she has been through, after all the danger, mystery, and chaos that shaped her life, she never truly pictured herself becoming a quiet, polished lady of society. She has fought too hard to prove herself worthy of the Holmes name. So the thought of leaving all that behind and becoming Lady Enola Tewksbury, a respectable high-class woman with no danger, no cases, and no adventures ahead of her, terrifies her more than she expected. In the middle of all that pressure, one memory rises in her mind. It is something her mother once told her. In life, there are only 2 roads, the one you choose for yourself, and the one other people choose for you. But even with all her doubts, Enola has no intention of abandoning her fiancé at the altar, so she rushes into a carriage and urgently tells the driver to go as fast as possible. Sadly, the journey does not stay peaceful for long. Halfway through the ride, someone begins chasing them on horseback. The rider is moving fast, and from the look of things, his intentions do not seem friendly. The driver warns Enola to stay inside and hold tight, explaining that Malta, where the wedding is supposed to take place, is full of bandits and thieves. As far as he can tell, this masked rider is probably one of them, but the rider has chosen the wrong woman to chase. Within seconds, Enola climbs onto the roof of the moving carriage, grabs a rifle, and prepares to fire. But just before she pulls the trigger, the man removes his covering and reveals his face. It is Watson, Sherlock's trusted assistant, and the one man her brother relies on more than anyone else. The shock hits Enola at exactly the wrong moment. She loses her balance, slips from the speeding carriage, and crashes hard onto the ground. After a painful fall, she manages to get back on her feet and immediately confronts Watson, giving him exactly the kind of scolding he deserves for approaching her like a criminal with a bandana hiding his face. But Watson does not have time to defend his terrible entrance. He brings news far worse than a ruined wedding arrival. Sherlock has been kidnapped. To understand how things reached this point, the story takes us back to the past, to the time when Enola finally received her official detective certificate and began working alongside her brother. Sherlock handled the wealthy clients, the powerful families, and the high-profile cases. Enola, meanwhile, focused on ordinary people, using those smaller investigations to sharpen her skills and gain real experience. One afternoon, while they were looking into a strange murder case, Enola explains that from Monday to Friday, detective work made her truly happy. Those were the days filled with clues, suspects, and the thrill of solving mysteries. But weekends were different. Weekends belonged to Ernest Tewksbury, the boy who had captured her heart and somehow managed to become the reason behind nearly every smile she had. Everything seemed lovely until the day Ernest suddenly dropped to one knee and asked her to marry him. In that instant, Enola's face went pale. The proposal was romantic, yes, but it also forced her to imagine a future she had never fully prepared herself for. News of the young female detective becoming a proper lady spread through the city almost immediately. People everywhere seemed fascinated by it. Everyone had something to say. Everyone, that is, except Sherlock. Sherlock had become completely absorbed in a case of his own. He was so consumed by the mystery that he no longer wrote his notes in normal, readable language. Instead, he invented a strange private code, so Enola could not understand what he was working on. By doing so, he kept her entirely shut out from his progress. About a week later, Enola traveled to Malta to meet Ernest's mother. During their lunch together, the older woman asked Enola who she wanted to invite to the wedding. Enola handed her a tiny piece of paper with only a few names written on it. Her brother, Watson, and no one else. The reason was simple. Ever since explosives became easier to obtain in London, Enola's mother had become even more unpredictable than before, and her actions had pushed her close to the top of the city's most wanted list. It was during that same lunch with Ernest's mother that Enola learned the wedding would not be held in London at all. Instead, it would take place in Malta, a small island far away from the noise and complications of city life. Ernest's mother explained that she herself had married there, making the place deeply meaningful to the family. Because of that, Enola found herself in a position where refusing felt almost impossible. And from that moment forward, everything connected to becoming a respectable lady began swallowing her life piece by piece. The expensive fabrics, the grand wedding dresses, the formal traditions, the stiff manners, all of it started appearing around her as if her old life was slowly being packed away. And then came the dinners. Not small, comfortable dinners with people she actually cared about, but enormous, polished gatherings filled with important people who were somehow both powerful and painfully dull. These were the kind of guests who barely looked in your direction unless they had already found something about you to judge. During one of those dinners, Ernest's uncle, Samson, stood up to make a toast. Samson was not just another relative. He was the man responsible for the island's security, which meant people listened when he spoke. But instead of offering a warm family welcome, he used the moment to remind everyone of Enola's modest background. The comment drew a few quiet laughs from the guests, and then he added that he hoped this marriage would not slow down Ernest's future rise in the House of Lords. So, at that point, it became perfectly clear. Among the wealthy and politically powerful, Enola was not exactly being welcomed with open arms. But while most of the room was busy judging her, something else caught Sherlock's eye. Above the gathering, away from the center of attention, there was a strange man watching everything carefully. He stayed out of sight, but his eyes never seemed to stop moving, almost like a predator studying its target from a hidden branch. Later that night, after the dinner had ended, Enola could tell that her brother was troubled, so she went to his room to speak with him privately. Sherlock did not soften his words. He told her plainly that he never imagined she would choose this life for herself. To him, she was accepting a tradition she barely understood and trading her freedom for a polished, predictable future built around a title she would probably never even care to use. In Sherlock's eyes, it was more than disappointing. It was a waste, giving up the Holmes name, stepping away from her talent, and burying the instincts that made her such a brilliant detective felt, to him, like the worst decision she could possibly make. Enola tried to reassure him, saying that nothing had to change, but Sherlock did not believe that for even a second. He asked her if she truly thought Ernest, a man heading toward a political career in the House of Lords, would simply allow his wife to run around the city chasing criminals, risking her life, and giving society something new to gossip about every week. Sherlock knew the world they were entering, and in his mind, marriage would not protect Enola's freedom. It would quietly take it from her. That is why we learned something painful. The last time Enola saw Sherlock before his disappearance, she called him a bastard. It is a brutal thing to say to someone you love deeply, especially when those words might become the final thing they hear from you before vanishing completely. Now that the missing pieces of the past are clearer, the story brings us back to the present. Watson has taken Enola to Sherlock's room, which is now in a terrible state, full of scattered papers, objects, and clues waiting to be understood. Enola begins studying the place carefully, trying to figure out who took her brother or where he may have gone. As she searches, she notices a few details that do not feel accidental. Then she tells Watson something important. A Holmes does not disappear without leaving behind a trail clear enough for another Holmes to follow. In this case, the trail is hidden on the mirror. Using Sherlock's own fingerprints, a message has been left in Morse code. When Enola deciphers it, the word it reveals is Kos, the name of a city in Afghanistan. While Enola focuses on this strange clue, Watson informs her that the wedding guests have already started returning. Only then does the truth fully strike her. She has missed what was supposed to be the most important moment of her life. Panicked, she rushes off to find Ernest and explain everything before the damage becomes impossible to repair. But as she heads toward her fiancé, something else catches her attention. She spots a man wearing a uniform she does not recognize. There is something about him that feels familiar, and she begins to suspect he might be the same mysterious figure Sherlock had noticed during the dinner. So instead of going straight to Ernest, Enola makes a choice that feels almost instinctive. She follows the man and decides that the conversation with her fiancé will have to wait. The man quickly realizes someone is behind him. The moment he notices Enola, he bolts. He runs through the building, grabbing and throwing whatever he can find in an attempt to slow her down, but Enola is not easy to shake. She keeps chasing him through the corridors until, at last, she manages to corner him in a hallway. Before she can properly question him, the man suddenly collapses. That is when Enola sees the blood. Someone has shot him in the chest. Above them, a window slams shut in an instant, too quickly for her to see who was hiding there. The shooter disappears before Enola can even catch a clear glimpse. The dying man struggles to speak, and with his final breath, he says one strange word. Wrath. At that moment, the word means nothing to Enola. It is just another loose thread in a case that is becoming more confusing by the hour. That night, Enola spends most of her time trying to connect everything in her mind. Sherlock has vanished. The man she suspected may have been involved is now dead, and the only clues she has are two words that seem completely unrelated: Cos and Wrath. To make things worse, Sherlock's journals are filled with coded writing that she cannot understand yet. Whatever answers are hidden inside them, they will not reveal themselves easily. She knows she needs more time, but time is exactly what she does not seem to have. A few moments later, a shadow appears near the doorway. Enola reacts instantly. Her survival instincts take over before her brain can catch up. She grabs a candlestick and attacks first, only to realize a second later that the intruder is not an enemy at all. It is Ernest, and she has just broken his nose. The poor boy had only come looking for her, trying to find the right words after everything that happened. Enola immediately tries to explain herself. She tells him she was racing toward the wedding as fast as she could when Watson suddenly appeared with news about Sherlock. But Ernest hears only one part of that explanation: as fast as she could. To him, those words confirm something he had already feared. She had not been calmly on her way to marry him. She had been rushing, uncertain, possibly even moments away from turning back. And for Ernest, that is enough to hurt him deeply. He does not shout. He does not accuse her dramatically. He simply tells her that he truly hopes she finds Sherlock. He believes she can do it because he knows how capable she is. But when it comes to their relationship, their wedding, and what he is feeling right now, he has nothing left to say. Then he walks away, leaving Enola alone with both the case and the damage she has caused. The next morning, chaos erupts across the castle. A fire has broken out, and flames are spreading through the property. Panic fills the halls as people rush in every direction. Enola immediately starts searching for Ernest, only to learn that he ran into the burning building to save his mother. The problem is that neither of them has come back out. With smoke thickening and flames growing stronger, visibility becomes worse with every passing second. Enola knows that waiting for someone else to act could cost them their lives. So she finally stops hiding the abilities she has been trying so hard to bury under dresses, manners, and expectations. This is not the moment for pretending to be a proper lady. This is the moment for Enola Holmes. She pushes into the burning castle, moving through the smoke and heat as she searches for Ernest and his mother. When she finally reaches her future mother-in-law's room, she finds Ernest inside, frantic and desperate, trying to locate her before the fire consumes everything around them. But as Enola looks around the room, she notices something that changes everything. The door has been broken open by force. That means Ernest's mother was not trapped somewhere inside the room. Someone came in, took her, and left before the fire spread. Watson quickly begins helping both Enola and Ernest, but Enola's confidence is starting to crack. For the first time, she feels truly uncertain about whether she can solve the trail Sherlock left behind. And now the pressure is even worse. This is no longer only about saving her brother. Ernest's mother is also missing, and to him, she is one of the most important people in the world. Ernest, shaken and terrified, tells Enola that they have to move quickly. His mother is not like Sherlock. She is not trained for danger. She does not know how to survive captivity, and she does not have the same strength to endure something like this. Ernest knows that better than anyone because he knows his mother completely. While Ernest leaves to seek help from his uncle, Enola forces herself to focus on what she can actually do. She returns to her future mother-in-law's room and begins studying the scene properly. Piece by piece, she tries to rebuild what happened there, and soon one thing becomes clear: the kidnappers were searching for something. When they failed to find it, they started the fire, not simply to destroy the room, but to make sure nobody else could follow the same trail. The strange part is that all the expensive jewelry has been left untouched. That tells Enola they are not dealing with ordinary thieves. Whoever came here was not interested in money or valuables. They were looking for something far more specific. Then, beneath the mattress, Enola finds a small box. On it is a symbol she recognizes from Sherlock's journals. Inside the box are several medals. At first, they mean nothing to her, but she takes them anyway, because if someone was willing to burn the castle over this, then these medals must matter. Before she can investigate further, she hears someone approaching. She quickly hides because she cannot be caught in that room. A man slips inside, trying to move quietly, but Enola reacts first. She grabs him by the neck and demands to know where Sherlock is. The confrontation immediately turns into a fight. After Enola manages to beat him in a fair and direct struggle, the man finally identifies himself. His name is Mikhail, and he belongs to the Anti-Reform Party. He explains that he and many others have spent years fighting for Malta to be free from the British Empire. According to him, Sherlock's disappearance is almost certainly connected to a woman named Adeline Rath. Adeline, he says, is dangerous. She is powerful, violent, and influential enough to control the governor himself. Mikhail had been following Enola because he believed she might lead him to Adeline's hiding place, or at least give him some way to track her movements. But before the conversation can go any deeper, the police arrive. Mikhail knows exactly what will happen if they catch him. He will be locked away for the rest of his life, so he escapes immediately, leaving Enola behind to face the authorities. Enola is taken to the police station, where Sergeant Indri begins questioning her. During the interrogation, she brings up the name Adeline Rath, and the reaction is instant. The moment Indri hears it, he becomes visibly uneasy. Clearly the name means something to him, but before Enola can push him for answers, Samson enters the station. Now we learn that Samson is not only Ernest's uncle, but also the governor of Malta. He immediately takes control of the situation and humiliates the sergeant, making it clear that Enola is not someone they are allowed to treat like an ordinary prisoner. He tells Indri that dragging her into such a filthy place is an insult serious enough to cost him his job on the spot. Behind Samson is Ernest, who has come to get Enola out before she ends up trapped in a cell. But Enola is not comforted by Samson's rescue. She understands something important. Indri might have known useful information, and Samson did not interrupt because he wanted to protect her. He interrupted because he was protecting something else, a secret. Once they leave the police station, Enola shows the medals to Ernest. He recognizes them right away and tells her they belong to his father. They were meant to be given to them as a thoughtful wedding gift, but beyond that, he does not know what importance they might have. A few moments later, Samson separates from them. Enola watches him carefully and sees him speaking in a rushed, secretive way to a woman nearby. Then Enola notices something on the woman's dress. The embroidery matches the torn piece of fabric she found on the floor of Sherlock's room. That is enough. The woman moves toward the carnival and Enola follows her. But the woman is not unaware. She knows Enola is behind her, and instead of trying to lose her, she uses the situation to her advantage. She leads Enola into a place where she controls the surroundings, a hidden underground warehouse. There, the woman suddenly turns the tables. She surprises Enola with a gun and warns her that following her was a mistake. According to her, Enola will not be leaving this place alive. Enola tries to ask about Sherlock, desperate to know where her brother is, but before the woman can reveal anything useful, a gunshot hits her from behind. She collapses and dies before she can say another word. Enola immediately takes cover and tries to get close enough to understand where the shot came from. But before she can react properly, a rope comes out of nowhere and tightens around her neck. The attacker begins choking her. With only seconds left before she loses consciousness, Enola manages to pull the powerful figure down with her, and when she finally sees who it is, the truth becomes horrifying. It is Moriarty. Moriarty openly admits that Sherlock is alive, but locked away. She has been keeping him prisoner and has taken great pleasure in torturing him over the past several days. She also mocks Ernest and the pain he suffered during the wedding. Watching his face fall apart minute by minute, while Enola failed to arrive, had amused her deeply. She says she did not need to kill him immediately, because watching him suffer emotionally was far more entertaining. Then Moriarty attacks Enola with a shovel. The fight becomes brutal, and Moriarty nearly kills her. But just when Enola is about to lose, Eudora, the mother of the Holmes family, suddenly appears with a rifle in her hands, ready to defend her daughter. Moriarty instantly understands that she has been trapped. But instead of surrendering, she pulls out a glycerin grenade and throws it against the wall. The explosion tears through the structure, creating an opening and giving her the chance to escape through a tunnel. Enola is furious with her mother, but beneath that anger is something else. Eudora actually came to Malta for the wedding. She may not have been willing to appear openly in public, but she wanted to see her daughter walk down the aisle. She wanted that memory, even if she had to watch from the shadows. Eudora then warns Enola about Moriarty. If Enola wants to defeat her, she must understand that Moriarty thinks in a way very similar to Sherlock. That means Enola cannot only focus on what is directly in front of her, she must also study what has been left behind. More importantly, Eudoria has discovered something crucial. Sherlock is still alive, and Enola must do everything she can to rescue him. Eudoria calls Sherlock her favorite son, which annoys Enola immediately. Her mother quickly clarifies that Enola is not her favorite child either, which does not exactly make the moment warmer, but it does make it feel painfully like family. Afterward, Enola returns to Ernest and tells him what she has learned. The person behind all of this is an old enemy, and as far as Enola can tell, both Sherlock and Ernest's mother are still alive. Her reasoning is simple. If Moriarty has kept Sherlock alive, then she most likely has not killed Ernest's mother either. For Ernest, that thought brings at least a small amount of relief. Later, as they continue walking and thinking through the case, Enola spots a small shack near the beach. After everything they have survived, the failed wedding, the kidnapping, the fire, the death, and the return of Moriarty, she and Ernest step inside, finally giving themselves a quiet moment alone. That night, with the chaos finally quieting down around them, Enola stops hiding behind excuses and tells Ernest the truth. When she agreed to marry him, she was saying yes to him. She was saying yes to the bond they had built, to the happiness they shared, and to the life she imagined with the person standing in front of her. But after that came everything else. The formal dinners, the powerful families, the expectations, the titles, the stiff manners, the entire world of high society that seemed to close in around her from every direction. It was not Ernest she feared. It was the life that came attached to his name. The more she was pushed into that polished world, the more she felt like a stranger wearing someone else's future. She explains that she never doubted loving him. She never doubted wanting to spend her life with him either. What frightened her was becoming a lady in the way everyone expected her to be. That was not the life she wanted, and pretending otherwise had only made everything worse. Meanwhile, Moriarty is enjoying her own game with Sherlock. As he remains trapped, she begins revealing pieces of her plan, clearly proud of how carefully she arranged every step. She tells him how simple it was to manipulate Ernest's mother into choosing Malta for the wedding. After all, Moriarty had been preparing everything on the island from the moment she was released a year earlier. Adeline Wrath, according to her, was nothing more than a useful piece on the board. Moriarty used Adeline to get close to Ernest's mother, earn her trust, and gently guide her toward the idea that Malta would be the perfect place for the wedding. Since it was the same place where the older woman had once been married, convincing her was almost too easy. Sherlock tries to keep the conversation going. He offers to continue playing Moriarty's cruel little intellectual game if she will at least give Ernest's mother some water. For a brief moment, it seems like the bargain might work. But after listening to Sherlock's deductions, Moriarty decides she is not impressed. His theories, in her opinion, are too loose and uncertain to deserve a reward. So just as the old woman is about to drink, Moriarty pours the water onto the floor instead. Then she walks away, making sure Sherlock understands the humiliation clearly. In her mind, she has beaten him completely. Back near the tent, Enola receives an unexpected visit from her mother, along with the doctor and Mikhail. But surprisingly, the strongest clue comes from Ernest himself. He remembers that the mysterious woman in the purple dress had been wearing a very expensive, high-society hat. That detail matters because it suggests Moriarty is not acting alone. Someone wealthy and influential is supporting her. And Ernest believes he knows who that person might be. Enola thinks back to the moment when she saw the woman speaking in the street. One of the people with her was the governor, Samson. But there was another figure there too, someone wearing a strange fox mask, with blonde hair visible beneath it. More importantly, that person had medals pinned to their clothing. When they compare that memory with the medals from the box, one match becomes obvious almost immediately. The dead man in the alley, the governor, and the blonde man all shared the same medal. It bears the word Afghanistan, along with the outline of an elephant. That means the next person they need to confront is Samson. The problem is that he is currently inside the military barracks, and getting in there will not be simple. It is the kind of place where one wrong step could get them arrested before they even reach the front door. For that, they will need Mikhail's help, especially his ability to move quietly and stay unseen. Still, stealth only takes them so far. When their careful approach begins to fall apart, Eudoria solves the problem in her own very direct way. She pulls out a gun, overpowers a police officer, and forces him to take them straight to the records room. Inside, they search for anything connected to the violent battle in which Ernest's father, his cousins, and the person who may now be at the center of this conspiracy all took part. But when they reach the files, the most important records are gone. Someone has stolen the pages. Luckily, paper remembers more than people expect. The writing may have been removed, but the pressure marks remain on the sheets underneath. So by rubbing shaved pencil lead across the page, they are able to reveal the hidden impressions left behind. Slowly, the missing words begin to appear, and with them, the truth comes out. In Afghanistan, British and Maltese troops carried out a massacre in exchange for an enormous amount of gold. What had been buried as a military secret was not some honorable act of war. It was bloodshed, greed, and betrayal covered up by medals and official silence. Enola takes the evidence directly to Samson's office and reveals the truth to Ernest. Samson does not bother denying it. Instead, he admits that in war, terrible choices are made. He does not want Ernest to hate his father. According to Samson, Peter loved his family deeply, but the truth remains ugly. Ernest's father had been in charge of the entire operation. His decisions saved many British and Maltese lives, but they also destroyed far more innocent lives, people who were only defending their own land against an empire that had decided to take it from them. For Ernest, the revelation is devastating. He has spent his life trying to stand up for the poor, fighting for fairness, dignity, and equal treatment. So learning that his own father was responsible for a massacre shakes him in a way no ordinary betrayal ever could. The man he admired is suddenly tied to something monstrous. Enola then asks Samson the question that still matters most: where is the gold? Samson explains what happened during the return voyage. Peter could not live with what they had done. The guilt broke him, so after everyone else had left the ship, he sailed away alone and sank it, making sure no one could use that gold to profit from the innocent lives they had taken. That detail sparks something in Enola's mind. She suddenly understands where Peter hid the gold. When Ernest was a child, he and his father used to pretend they were pirates. And earlier, while they were swimming at the beach, Ernest had pointed out a mysterious cave he had always wanted to explore. Now Enola realizes that the cave was not just a childhood curiosity. It may have been the hiding place all along. That is where the gold must be. But at the same time, another terrifying realization hits her. Sherlock was not the one who left the message on the mirror. He was not the one guiding her through the clues. Moriarty was. From the beginning, Moriarty has been using Enola as a tool to solve the mystery for her. She knew that only someone from the Holmes family would be clever enough to uncover the truth, or perhaps someone close enough to becoming part of that family, if Enola had not panicked before walking down the aisle. There is no time left to waste. Enola changes out of her wedding clothes and heads straight for the cave, following the path her deductions have laid out for her. Somewhere inside that hidden place, if she is right, lies the missing ton of gold that everyone has been chasing. Inside the cave, Enola spots something beneath the water, a heavy chain disappearing into the dark surface. She grabs it and pulls with all the strength she has left. For a moment, it barely moves, but she refuses to let go. After straining against the weight, she finally manages to drag a wooden chest up from the bottom of the sea. Once she breaks the lock open, the truth is right in front of her. The box is filled with gold. It is not a small amount either. There is enough there for someone to disappear, start over, and live comfortably for the rest of their life. But Enola immediately knows something is wrong. This cannot be all of it. According to the records, the stolen treasure was not just a chest full of coins or bars. It was a full ton of gold. So where is the rest? Before Enola can return to Watson and tell him what she has discovered, she realizes she is not alone. Moriarty has been waiting for her, and she has not come empty-handed. Around the cave, a dozen armed men step into position, surrounding Enola from every possible angle. Moriarty wants the gold for herself. She tells Enola that she is tired of living at the mercy of her own brilliant mind, while men with fortunes built on violence and stolen lives continue enjoying everything. In her eyes, she has finally earned something more. After outthinking the cleverest man she has ever known, she believes it is now her turn to take what she wants and build a better life for herself. But just when Moriarty seems ready to claim victory, the situation shifts. She is not the only one who brought allies. Ernest suddenly appears with Mikkel beside him, followed by 20 loyal men who stand with him in his fight for change. Moriarty is outnumbered, and for a second, it looks like they might finally arrest her. But Moriarty never allows anything to be that simple. Before anyone can restrain her, she pulls 2 grenades from her pockets. Panic breaks out instantly. The threat triggers chaos, gunfire erupts, and in the confusion, Moriarty manages to escape. Enola does not let her vanish. She mounts a horse and chases Moriarty across the island, following her all the way to a nearby abbey. There, the 2 women face each other again, and this time, Enola has no intention of losing. Moriarty attacks with everything she has, even using a knife, but Enola fights back harder. After a fierce struggle, she manages to overpower her. Then Enola enters the Abbey and finally finds what she has been fighting for. Sherlock is there. So is Ernest's mother. Enola frees them both, but the danger is not finished yet. Moriarty returns with a gun in her hand, and within seconds, she is moments away from executing Enola right there. But Sherlock is not helpless anymore. He manages to break free from another restraint and sneaks up behind Moriarty. Suddenly, the weapon is in his hands, and the balance of power has changed completely. For Sherlock, this is no longer a puzzle or a clever battle of minds. He knows Moriarty too well. Prison will never hold her for long. If she survives, she will escape, return, and keep destroying lives. To him, there is only one permanent way to stop her. One bullet, and Moriarty will never hurt anyone again. But before Sherlock can cross that line and stain his hands with blood, Ernest's mother steps in. She grabs a rock and strikes Moriarty over the head, knocking her unconscious instantly. Just like that, she saves Enola's life, and saves Sherlock from becoming the kind of man who kills in cold blood. A few days later, Ernest takes responsibility for everything that has happened. He promises that the gold will be returned to the Afghan people, because it belongs to the people whose lives were destroyed for it. He also begins pushing for Malta to break free from British control, even though that means his own uncle will have to face serious charges for what was done on the island. With Sherlock safe, Enola and her brother finally make peace. He apologizes for the harsh things he said to her that night, and Enola does the same. After everything they have lost, risked, and survived, their bond is stronger than the argument that separated them. Now only one unfinished matter remains: the wedding. The ceremony that had been interrupted at the beginning of the story finally takes place, but this time, it is nothing like the grand, suffocating event Enola had feared. It is beautiful but humble, honest, personal. Enola Holmes marries Ernest, who has given up his title as Lord so they can create a life that belongs to them, not to society, not to politics, and not to anyone else's expectations. There are no overwhelming luxuries, no polished performances, no cold guests waiting to judge every movement. Instead, the couple marries on the cliff where Ernest spent the happiest moments of his life, the same place where he now hopes to build an even better future with his wife. The ceremony is simple, surrounded only by the people who truly love them. And later that night, as fireworks fill the sky above the water, Enola and Ernest celebrate in their own way, not in a ballroom, not under the rules of high society, but swimming beneath the sparks of light, free at last to begin their life together on their own terms. Before we even get into the actual mystery of Enola Holmes 3, I think it is important to talk about the kind of expectations this movie was carrying, because this was not one of those sequels where people walked in completely neutral. By the time a franchise reaches its third movie, the audience already has a relationship with it. You are not just watching the characters anymore. You are comparing the feeling. You remember how the first movie surprised you. You remember how the second one either improved things or at least kept the energy alive. So when the third one arrives, naturally, you are waiting to see whether it can hold that same charm. And with Enola Holmes, that charm was a big part of the appeal. The first two movies had this playful, energetic quality. They were not perfect detective masterpieces or anything like that, but they knew what they were. They had a young heroine with personality, a mystery that kept moving, a little romance, some family drama, and that light adventure tone that made the whole thing easy to enjoy. You could sit down, get pulled into the case, enjoy Enola's confidence, and still feel like the movie had enough cleverness to keep your attention. That is why a lot of people came into the third film expecting something at least on that level. For some viewers, the first two movies had them properly invested. They were actually trying to solve the case, looking for clues, paying attention to small details, and enjoying the feeling of being one step behind Enola. That is a very specific kind of fun. A mystery movie does not always need to be dark or extremely complex, but it does need to make you curious, and the earlier films did that well enough to build trust. So when Enola Holmes 3 starts, you're hoping for that same feeling again. You want to be pulled into the investigation. You want the clues to feel satisfying. You want Enola to feel sharper than ever. You want Sherlock to matter. You want the romance with Tewkesbury to keep growing without taking over everything. And honestly, you want the movie to prove that this series still has a reason to continue. That is where the pressure comes from. Because the third movie is not just being judged as a standalone adventure. It is being judged against the memory of the first two. And sometimes, that memory can be tough competition. The earlier films felt spunky, fresh, and more focused. They had that sense of discovery, especially because Enola herself still felt like she was carving out her own place in a world that constantly underestimated her. By the third film, that underdog freshness is harder to recreate. We already know Enola is capable. We already know she is clever. We already know she can challenge the expectations around her. So the movie has to find a new angle. It has to mature with her, but without losing the spark that made her enjoyable in the first place. And that is probably why the reaction to this film feels so divided. Some people went in wanting emotional closure, and for them, the movie delivers something meaningful. Others went in wanting a stronger mystery, the same playful energy, and the same chemistry that made the earlier movies work. For those viewers, the third film immediately starts at a disadvantage. Personally, I think this is the kind of sequel where your expectations really shape your experience. If you mainly wanted to spend more time with Enola, Tewksbury, Sherlock in this world, then there is already comfort in just returning to it. But if you were expecting the third chapter to be the sharpest, most suspenseful, most confident mystery of the trilogy, then that is where disappointment starts to creep in. And that is the tricky thing about Enola Holmes 3. It is not entering an empty room. It is walking into a room where the audience already remembers how fun this franchise used to feel. So even before the plot fully begins, the movie has to fight against one question sitting in the back of your mind. Can this one still make us feel the way the first two did? That question follows the entire film. And depending on what you loved most about the earlier entries, your answer may be very different. What makes Enola Holmes 3 a little difficult to talk about is that it is not the kind of movie where everyone seems to be reacting from the same place. Some people walked away genuinely happy, and I get why. There is comfort in being back with these characters. Millie Bobby Brown still has that lively Enola energy, the movie looks good, the romance gets a proper emotional payoff, and for longtime fans, there is a sense that the story finally gives them something they were waiting for. It feels like a closing chapter in a way that a lot of franchise movies do not even attempt anymore. But then there is the other side. For another group of viewers, this was not just a mild step down. It felt like a real disappointment. They were expecting the third film to build on what worked before, maybe sharpen the mystery, maybe push Enola into a more confident detective role, maybe give Sherlock something stronger to do. Instead, they felt like the movie was slower, more predictable, and missing that spark that made the first two so easy to enjoy. And honestly, that split reaction says a lot about the film itself. Because Enola Holmes 3 has pieces that work, but they do not all work for the same audience. If you are watching mainly for the emotional side, you may come out satisfied. The wedding, the romance, the family moments, the sense of closure, all of that can absolutely land if you are already attached to Enola and Tewksbury. There is a sweetness to it. It knows how to make fans smile in those final moments. But if you are watching it as a mystery first, the experience becomes much shakier. The case does not have the same pull. The suspense does not tighten in the same way. Some of the reveals feel too easy to see coming, and once that happens, the movie starts relying more on charm than actual intrigue. And charm can carry a lot, but it cannot carry everything. That is probably why some people call it a fun, satisfying sequel, while others describe it as a one-time watch. Both reactions can exist because the film is doing two different things at once. It wants to be an emotional conclusion for fans, but it also wants to be a clever detective adventure. The emotional conclusion works better than the detective adventure, and that imbalance is where the mixed response really comes from. There are moments where you can feel the old appeal still trying to break through, a little banter here, a nice visual there, a romantic scene that actually has warmth, a familiar character showing up and reminding you why this series became popular in the first place. Those moments keep the film from completely falling apart. But then the story slows down, or the mystery becomes too obvious, or a character makes a strange decision, or the movie explains something that would have been more fun to figure out ourselves. And suddenly you remember why some viewers felt let down. So the reaction is not simply good movie or bad movie. It is more specific than that. For fans who wanted closure, Enola Holmes 3 may feel rewarding. For fans who wanted the strongest case in the trilogy, it may feel underwhelming. For casual viewers, it might be enjoyable enough in the moment. For people who loved the sharper energy of the first two films, it may feel like something important has faded. And that is where I think the film lands overall in this early discussion. Not terrible, not pointless, but definitely uneven. It has enough heart to please some of its audience, but not enough mystery to fully satisfy the rest. The biggest problem with Enola Holmes 3 is not that it has nothing good in it. It does. The problem is that the first two movies had already taught the audience what this franchise could feel like when it was working. And that comparison is hard to ignore. The first movie had freshness on its side. We were meeting Enola properly for the first time, seeing her personality, her rebelliousness, her way of thinking, and her messy place inside the Holmes family. It had that new character finding her voice, energy, which is always difficult to recreate later. Even if every mystery beat was not perfect, the film had momentum because Enola herself felt like a discovery. The second movie, for many people, carried that energy forward. It felt more confident. The mystery had more pull, the character dynamics were stronger, and the film seemed to understand what audiences liked about the first one. It still had that playful quality, but it also felt a little sharper. You could feel the series settling into itself. That is why the third movie feels a little strange. It is bigger in some ways. It has a fresh setting, more emotional material, and a more conclusive feeling. But somehow it does not always feel more alive. The earlier films had this quick, cheeky rhythm. Enola would look at the camera, pull you into her thoughts, chase a clue, run into danger, and the whole thing moved with a kind of youthful confidence. Here, that rhythm is not completely gone, but it is weaker. You can still recognize the franchise, of course. The costumes are there, the direct narration is there, the romance is there, Sherlock is there, the mystery-adventure setup is there, but recognition is not the same as energy. The first two movies felt like they were inviting you into a game. This one often feels like it is guiding you through a story that has already been solved behind the scenes. That difference matters. A mystery film should make you lean in. The earlier entries made you curious enough to keep watching the details. This one sometimes makes you feel like you are waiting for the movie to catch up to what you have already guessed. And maybe that is why some fans describe it as missing the charm. Charm is not just jokes or costumes or romance. Charm is timing. It is confidence. It is the feeling that the movie knows exactly how much to reveal and when to hold back. The first two films had more of that balance. Enola Holmes 3 has the ingredients, but the mixture is not as smooth. Even the humor feels different. The earlier films had a lighter bounce to them. They knew when to be serious, but they did not stay heavy for too long. This third movie leans more into emotion and drama, which makes sense for where Enola is in her life, but it also means some of the carefree fun gets pushed aside. For viewers who loved the playful spirit of the first two, that change can feel like a loss. The mystery comparison is even tougher. The first two films made the cases feel more engaging. You wanted to follow the clues. You wanted to see how Enola would solve things. In the third film, the case feels simpler, and the twists do not hit with the same surprise. It is not that nothing happens. A lot happens, but the actual detective satisfaction is thinner. And then there is the chemistry. The earlier movies built a lot of affection around Enola and Tewksbury. Their scenes had a nervous, youthful charm. In this one, the emotional payoff is bigger, but some viewers felt the spark itself was not as strong as before. That is a tricky thing. A romance can reach a beautiful destination and still lose some of the tension that made the journey exciting. So when people say Enola Holmes 3 is not as strong as the first two, they are not always saying it is unwatchable. They are saying it does not quite recreate the feeling that made them fans. It has polish but less surprise. It has emotion but less bounce. It has a larger story, but not necessarily a better mystery. And that is the real issue with comparing it to the earlier films. The first two had flaws, yes, but they also had a sense of discovery. This third one feels more like a franchise trying to complete its emotional checklist while struggling to keep the detective spark alive. For some viewers, the closure will be enough. For others, especially those who came for the cleverness and playful energy, it will feel like the series lost a little bit of its personality right when it should have been at its most confident. When it comes to the story of Enola Holmes 3, this is where the movie starts to feel a bit uneven. Not because the setup has no potential. It does. A third film should naturally feel like a bigger step. Enola is older now, her life is changing, her relationship with Tewksbury is moving into a serious place, and Sherlock is pulled into a more vulnerable position than usual. On paper, that sounds like a strong foundation. There is mystery, danger, romance, family tension, and the possibility of a proper final chapter. But the actual execution does not always hold those pieces together. At times, the film feels like it knows where it wants to end emotionally, but it is less confident about how to get there as a story. You can almost feel the movie aiming for a big, satisfying conclusion, especially for fans who have followed Enola from the beginning. The problem is that the journey toward that conclusion sometimes feels rushed, sometimes too simple, and sometimes strangely overloaded. That is an odd combination, but it is exactly what happens here. The plot has a lot going on, yet the story itself can still feel thin. Characters are moving around, secrets are being revealed, people are in danger, and the film keeps introducing new complications. But not all of those complications feel meaningful. Some of them feel like they are there to make the movie look busier than it really is, and that is where the writing starts to show its cracks. A good mystery adventure needs a strong backbone. Even if the tone is playful, even if the film is family-friendly, the story still needs to feel carefully built. Every new event should pull us deeper into the case or reveal something sharper about the characters. In Enola Holmes 3, some scenes do that, but others feel like they are simply pushing the movie forward because the next thing has to happen. That is probably why some viewers felt the writing was rushed or unfinished, especially near the ending. The film begins with promise, but as it moves closer to the final stretch, the structure becomes easier to predict. Instead of tightening, it starts to flatten. Instead of surprising us, it starts confirming things we may already suspect. And once that happens, the story loses some of its grip. There is also a slightly childish quality in parts of the plotting, not in the sense that the film is made for younger viewers. That is fine. The franchise has always had an accessible, light adventure tone, but childish in the sense that certain developments feel too convenient, too obvious, or too simply handled. The movie sometimes treats big situations as if they do not need much emotional or logical weight behind them. That weakens the impact. Because when a story includes kidnapping, danger, betrayal, romance, family history, and a major villain, the audience needs to feel the pressure of those things. They cannot just be plot items, they have to leave a mark. Here, some of those elements happen, but they do not always land with the force they should. Still, the film is not completely lifeless. There are moments where the story works because the characters are familiar enough to carry it. Enola's presence gives scenes energy. Tewksbury's relationship with her gives the movie warmth. Sherlock's situation adds a more serious angle, and the setting gives everything a fresh visual flavor. So while the story may not be strong enough on its own, the franchise appeal does help cover some of the weaker writing, but only up to a point. Because by the third movie, the audience expects more than just, "It was nice to see them again." The story needed to feel sharper. It needed more confidence. It needed to prove that this chapter existed for more than emotional closure. Instead, it sometimes feels like the movie is trying to do too many things without fully developing any one of them. That is why the plot can be entertaining in the moment, but not especially memorable afterward. You may enjoy certain scenes. You may like the characters. You may even feel satisfied by the ending. But when you step back and look at the actual story, it does not feel as strong as it should. It feels like a decent idea that needed another layer of polish, another pass at the script, and maybe a clearer sense of what the main case was supposed to make us feel. For a casual watch, that might be enough. But for the third film in a series that once felt sharper and more charming, enough is not the same as satisfying. For a movie with the Holmes name attached to it, the mystery really should be the thing holding everything together. And this is where Enola Holmes 3 starts to struggle the most. The film has mystery elements, obviously. There are clues, danger, hidden motives, suspicious people, and the usual sense that Enola is being pulled into something larger than she first understands. On a basic level, the ingredients are there, but the problem is that the case itself does not feel as sharp or as satisfying as it should. It is not confusing in a fun way. It is not layered in a way that makes you want to pause and think. It is not the kind of mystery where every scene makes you question what you missed. Instead, it becomes surprisingly easy to stay ahead of the movie. And that is a dangerous place for any detective story to be. With the first two films, even if they were not the most complex mysteries ever written, there was still a sense of involvement. You were watching Enola work things out, and there was some enjoyment in trying to follow her thinking. You felt like the movie wanted you to participate. Maybe you would catch a clue, maybe you would miss one, but either way, the investigation had enough energy to keep you engaged. Here, that feeling is weaker. A lot of the mystery feels predictable too early. You can sense where the story is going before the movie seems ready to admit it. The villain reveal does not have the same impact because the film does not hide its hand well enough. The case should slowly tighten around the characters, but instead, it often feels like the answers are already sitting too close to the surface. That takes away one of the biggest pleasures of watching a Holmes-style story. Because we do not just watch these films for action or costumes or romance. Those things help, of course, but the real hook should be curiosity. We want that little feeling of, wait, what does this mean? We want to suspect the wrong person. We want to think we have figured it out and then realize we were missing one crucial detail. Enola Holmes 3 does not create enough of that. The mystery is not terrible, but it is softer than expected. It feels simplified. It moves forward, but without that clever bite that makes a detective story memorable. Instead of building suspense, it often just reveals information. And there is a big difference between a mystery unfolding and a plot simply explaining itself. That is why some viewers felt less invested this time. The film gives you events, but not always intrigue. It gives you movement, but not always tension. There are moments that should feel urgent or surprising, but they land more like steps in a story we already understand. And when the detective element is weak, everything else has to work harder. The romance has to carry more weight. The visuals have to keep your attention. The performances have to make scenes feel alive even when the case itself is not pulling you in. Sometimes they do. Millie Bobby Brown's presence helps. The setting helps. The emotional ending helps. But those things cannot fully replace the pleasure of a good mystery. What makes it more frustrating is that Enola herself is built for a better case than this. She is curious, bold, fast-thinking, and emotionally driven. She should be facing a mystery that tests all of those qualities. Instead, the case often feels too easy for her, or worse, too easy for us. And that is probably the clearest way to describe the problem. The movie does not always make Enola look brilliant by giving her something brilliant to solve. It simply moves her through a case that does not push back hard enough. For a casual adventure, that may be fine. But for a third Enola Holmes film, especially after the first two built a stronger sense of detective fun, it feels like a missed opportunity. The movie has heart. It has familiar faces. It has a few enjoyable turns, but as a mystery, it needed to be sharper, sneakier, and much harder to solve. One of the things that really hurts Enola Holmes 3 is the way the clues are handled. And I do not mean that every clue in the movie is bad. That would be too harsh. There are still little pieces of investigation. There are ciphers. There are hidden connections. There are moments where the film clearly wants us to feel like we are inside Enola's process. But the problem is that the movie often does not let those clues breathe. It gives them to us too neatly. A good detective story should make you work a little, not in a frustrating way, not in a way where the audience has no chance of understanding anything, but just enough that you feel involved. You want to notice something in the background. You want to wonder why a character said a certain line. You want to connect two details before the detective does, or maybe get completely misled and enjoy being wrong. Here, the movie does not always give you that pleasure. A lot of the clues feel placed directly in Enola's path. She finds something, explains it, follows it, and then the next clue appears, then another, then another. After a while, it starts feeling less like deduction, and more like the story is leaving breadcrumbs with bright little signs over them. And that makes a big difference, because Enola is not supposed to be someone who just happens to discover things. She is supposed to think differently. She is supposed to observe what other people miss. That is the whole appeal of watching her grow into her own kind of detective. But in this film, too often, it feels like the mystery is helping her more than she is solving it. The cipher clues are a good example of that. They show up so conveniently that they begin to feel less exciting each time. Instead of feeling like clever little puzzles hidden inside the story, they start to feel like shortcuts. The movie needs Enola to move to the next stage, so a clue appears. The movie needs the audience to understand something, so Enola explains it. The movie needs progress, so the mystery gives her another piece. That is not the same as investigation, and this is where the film loses some of the Holmes flavor. With a Holmes story, even a lighter one, the satisfaction comes from watching intelligence at work. You want to see the detective notice a contradiction. You want to see them read a room, catch a lie, understand a motive, or predict what someone might do next. It does not always have to be complicated, but it should feel earned. In Enola Holmes 3, too much feels handed over. The movie also explains more than it needs to. There are moments where you can almost feel it worrying that the audience might miss something, so it spells it out. But that is exactly what makes the mystery feel smaller. When every important piece is underlined, there is no tension in figuring it out. There is no space for the viewer to sit there thinking, wait, did I catch that right? And honestly, that is a shame, because the series already had a built-in way to make this fun. Enola talking to the audience could have been used to pull us into her thinking, to make us feel like we were solving with her. But when the clues are too obvious, that direct narration can start to feel like the movie is not inviting us in. It is explaining the homework after already giving us the answers. That is why some viewers felt Enola was not really developing as a detective. She is older now. She is more experienced. This should have been the film where her deductive skills felt sharper than ever. Instead, she still stumbles onto important pieces in a way that feels too familiar from earlier entries. And when Sherlock is also not shown anticipating things properly, the problem becomes bigger. Now it is not just Enola who feels underwritten as a detective. The whole Holmes side of the movie starts to feel less intelligent than it should. That may sound like a small thing, but it is actually central to why the film feels weaker as a mystery. If the heroes are famous for intelligence, then the writing has to be intelligent enough to support them. The case has to challenge them. The clues have to feel hidden but fair. The discoveries have to feel earned. Otherwise, the movie is only telling us they are brilliant. It is not proving it, and that is the frustrating part of Enola Holmes 3. It still has the look of a mystery. It still has the language of a mystery. It still has Enola chasing clues and trying to solve something important. But the actual detective work does not always have that spark of cleverness. The film needed fewer obvious clues and more genuine deduction. Fewer convenient ciphers and more moments where Enola actually outthinks the situation. Fewer explanations and more trust in the audience. Because when a mystery lets us participate, we remember it. When it just hands us the answers, we move on. Another major issue with Enola Holmes 3 is that the story feels overloaded. And the strange thing is, it does not feel overloaded in a rich, layered way. It is not the kind of busy plot where every thread connects beautifully by the end and you look back thinking, okay, that was actually well planned. It feels more like the movie keeps adding ingredients because it wants the third film to feel bigger than the first two. There is a kidnapping, there is stolen treasure, there are corrupt soldiers, there are Malta revolutionaries, there is revenge, there is family tension, there is political conflict, there is Sherlock being pulled into danger. There is Enola's romance moving toward marriage, and somewhere inside all of that, there is supposed to be a mystery. That is a lot for one movie to carry. Now, to be fair, a sequel should expand things a little. You do not want the third film to feel like the exact same case with different costumes. Moving the story into a wider world, giving it more danger, more history, and more emotional consequence, that all makes sense. The problem is not ambition. The problem is control, because Enola Holmes 3 sometimes feels like it is juggling too many ideas without giving enough attention to any one of them. The kidnapping plot should feel urgent. It should make the story tighter. It should put pressure on Enola and Sherlock and make every decision feel more dangerous. But because the film has so many other things going on, that urgency does not always stay alive. The danger is there technically, but the emotional panic is not as strong as it should be. Then the treasure angle comes in, and suddenly the movie starts leaning more into adventure than investigation. That can be fun, but it also pulls attention away from the detective side. Instead of feeling like Enola is peeling back a brilliant mystery layer by layer, it starts to feel like she is being pushed through different plot stations. Then you add the corrupt soldiers and the revolutionaries, and the film starts reaching for a bigger political backdrop. Again, not a bad idea by itself. A story set in Malta with conflict and power struggles could have added something fresh. But the film does not always slow down enough to make those pieces feel fully alive. They become part of the noise around the mystery rather than something that truly deepens it. That is where the narrative starts to feel messy. A strong mystery usually needs focus. Even if there are multiple suspects and side plots, there has to be a clear center pulling everything together. In this movie, the center keeps shifting. One moment it is about the kidnapping. Then it is about treasure. Then it is about Moriarty. Then it is about political conflict. Then it is about Enola's future with Tewksbury. Then it is about Sherlock's vulnerability. Some of those threads are interesting. Some of them could have worked really well, but together they make the film feel crowded. And the more crowded the story becomes, the less room there is for suspense. That might sound odd, because usually more plot should mean more excitement. But that is not always how it works. If everything is happening at once, the audience does not automatically feel more engaged. Sometimes, we just feel less connected, because the movie is moving too quickly between ideas without letting the important ones land. That is what happens here in several places. The film gives us a lot of events, but not always enough weight behind them. A character is in danger, but before that danger can really sink in, the story is already moving to the next piece. A new complication appears, but before we fully understand why it matters, another one arrives. It keeps the movie busy, but busy is not the same as gripping. The earlier Enola Holmes movies had their share of moving parts too, but they felt cleaner. The stories had more room to breathe. The mystery was easier to follow without feeling empty, and the emotional beats had space around them. In this third film, the movie seems afraid that if it slows down, the audience will lose interest. Ironically, by adding too much, it sometimes makes the audience less invested, because when everything matters, nothing gets enough time to matter properly. The romance wants space. Sherlock's situation wants space. Moriarty wants space. The Malta setting wants space. The political material wants space. The treasure plot wants space. But the film only has so much room, so instead of one strong story, we get several half-developed threads competing with each other. And that is probably why some viewers describe the plot as haphazard or unfinished. It is not that the movie lacks ideas. It actually has too many. What it lacks is the discipline to decide which idea should dominate. Personally, I think the film would have been stronger if it had chosen one clear spine and built everything around that. Either make it a tight kidnapping mystery, or make it a full treasure adventure. Or make Moriarty the central psychological threat, or make the emotional marriage storyline the core and keep the case simpler, but trying to do all of it at once weakens the impact. By the end, you can still understand what happened, but understanding is not the same as satisfaction. The movie gives you plot, it gives you movement, it gives you danger, romance, politics, family, and adventure. But what it needed was a sharper shape, a cleaner mystery, a story where every thread felt necessary instead of just present, and that is why the overcrowded narrative becomes such a problem. Enola Holmes 3 clearly wants to feel larger and more mature, but in trying to expand the world, it sometimes loses the simple pleasure that made the earlier films work. Following Enola through one case that actually feels worth solving. One of the points where Enola Holmes 3 starts to feel less like a detective story and more like a familiar adventure movie is the whole treasure race angle. And to be clear, treasure hunts can be fun. There is nothing automatically wrong with them. A hidden object, a map, a secret location, people chasing the same prize from different sides, that kind of setup has worked in plenty of movies. It gives a story movement. It gives characters a reason to keep running from one place to another. It can even make a mystery feel more exciting if the clues are clever enough. But here, the treasure element feels a little too easy. The earlier Enola Holmes movies were at their best when the mystery felt personal and investigative. Enola was not just chasing a thing. She was trying to understand people, motives, secrets, and social traps. The cases had a sense of discovery because the story was not only asking, where is the object? It was asking, what is really happening here? In this third film, once the plot starts leaning into the treasure hunt, the detective side loses some of that texture. It becomes more about reaching the prize than solving the case. And that shift matters, because Enola is not supposed to feel like just another adventure hero running after hidden treasure. She is supposed to be a detective. Her strength should come from reading the situation better than everyone else, not simply arriving at the next location because the plot has pointed her there. That is probably why some viewers felt the movie became cliché. The moment the story turns into a race to find treasure, it starts feeling like something we have already seen many times before. There is less surprise in the structure. You can almost feel the movie moving through the expected beats. Discover a clue, chase the next lead, run into danger, get closer to the prize, face the villain near the end. It is not necessarily boring all the time, but it does feel familiar, and familiarity is dangerous for a mystery film. If the audience can sense the shape of the story too clearly, suspense weakens. You stop wondering what is going to happen and start waiting for the next expected step. That is where Enola Holmes 3 loses some of its edge. The treasure itself should have felt more mysterious, more emotionally important, or more tightly connected to Enola's personal journey. Instead, for some viewers, it becomes more of a plot device. It gives the characters something to chase, but it does not always make the story deeper. The film wants the treasure to raise the stakes, but it sometimes has the opposite effect. It makes the case feel more ordinary. That is a shame because the movie already had stronger emotional material sitting right there. Sherlock being in danger, Enola stepping into marriage, Tewksbury's family becoming more involved, Moriarty returning as a threat. Any of those could have created a more focused story, but when the treasure hunt takes over, the emotional and detective elements have to fight for space. The result is a movie that sometimes feels bigger, but not sharper. And maybe that is the real issue. The treasure race idea gives the film scale, but scale is not the same as cleverness. It gives the characters somewhere to go, but not always something interesting to figure out. For a different kind of movie, that might be enough. For Enola Holmes, it feels slightly off-brand, because the fun of this franchise should come from Enola noticing what others miss. It should come from her mind moving faster than the people around her. It should come from the audience trying to keep up with her. When the story becomes too much about chasing treasure, it reduces that pleasure. It turns the mystery into a route. And once a mystery starts feeling like a route, the excitement becomes much harder to sustain. So yes, the treasure hunt angle gives Enola Holmes 3 some adventure. It gives it movement. It gives it a more obvious third film scale. But it also makes the movie feel less unique, less clever, and less satisfying as a Holmes-style case. The film needed the treasure to feel like the center of a brilliant mystery. Instead, too often, it just feels like the thing everyone is running after. One of the more divisive parts of Enola Holmes 3 is the way it handles its themes. Now, this franchise has never been shy about what it believes. From the beginning, these movies have been built around Enola, pushing against a world that keeps trying to define her before she can define herself. That has always been part of the character. She is a young woman trying to make space for her own intelligence, her own choices, and her own future in a society that does not exactly make that easy. So the issue is not that Enola Holmes 3 has messages. The issue is that sometimes the messages feel louder than the story. There are ideas here about women's rights, independence, power, British colonialism, and who gets respected in society. On their own, those are not bad themes. In fact, they could have made the movie feel richer if they were woven naturally into the mystery. A detective story can absolutely carry social commentary. Sometimes that even makes the case more interesting, because the mystery is not just about who did something, but why the world allowed it to happen. But in this film, the balance does not always feel smooth. At times, it feels like the movie is repeating points the series has already made before. Men are often shown as foolish, arrogant, useless, or easily outperformed. Women are framed as sharper, stronger, more capable, and more morally aware. Again, that kind of contrast has been part of the franchise's identity from the start, but by the third movie, it needed more complexity. It needed a new angle. It needed to show growth instead of simply restating the same idea with a bigger backdrop. That is where some viewers may start to feel frustrated. Because after a while, the film's commentary can feel less like character drama and more like a message being pushed through the plot. Instead of letting us discover these ideas through Enola's choices, Sherlock's failures, Tewksbury's role, or Moriarty's motives, the movie sometimes seems to underline the point too strongly. And when a film underlines everything, the audience can start to feel managed rather than moved. The colonialism angle has a similar problem. Bringing British colonialism into the story could have added real weight. It could have given the Malta setting more historical tension and made the mystery feel connected to something larger than a simple treasure chase. But the film does not always develop that material deeply enough. It appears it gives the story a broader political flavor, but it does not always become as dramatically powerful as it should. So instead of feeling like a fully explored theme, it can feel like another layer added onto an already crowded story. That is the pattern with a lot of this film. It has ideas, it has things it wants to say, but because the plot is already juggling romance, kidnapping, treasure, Moriarty, Sherlock, family, and the emotional ending, the themes do not always get the space they need. They are present but not always integrated, and when themes are not integrated, they can start to feel like interruptions. This is especially noticeable because the mystery itself is not strong enough to carry everything underneath it. If the case were sharper, the commentary might have felt more organic. If the clues were more clever, if the villain were more layered, if the investigation forced Enola to confront these ideas in a more personal way, then the messages would have had more impact. But when the detective story feels thin, the themes become more exposed. You start noticing what the film is saying more than what the story is doing. That is never ideal. The best version of this movie would have allowed its messages to come through action and consequence. Show Enola learning something difficult. Show Sherlock being challenged in a way that changes him. Show Tewksbury's position creating real conflict. Show Moriarty's anger or ideology with enough depth that we understand why she became this kind of threat. Let the politics of the world shape the mystery instead of sitting around it. There are moments where the film comes close to that. Enola's emotional growth, especially around love and independence, feels more personal. That part of the message works better because it is tied directly to her life. She is not just making a speech about freedom, she is choosing what freedom means for her. That is more interesting. But the broader commentary is not always handled with the same care, and that is why this topic is so divisive. Some viewers will appreciate that the film continues to speak about women, power, independence, and social injustice. They may see it as part of what makes Enola Holmes distinct. Others will feel that the movie is recycling the same themes without adding enough new depth, and worse, doing it at the expense of mystery and character development. Personally, I think the film's heart is in the right place, but the execution is not always subtle enough. It wants to be meaningful, it wants to be modern, it wants to say something beyond the case, but meaning does not come from simply repeating a message. It comes from making that message feel alive inside the story. And too often, Enola Holmes 3 seems more interested in reminding us what it stands for than in building a mystery strong enough to make those ideas unforgettable. One thing Enola Holmes 3 clearly wants us to feel is that Enola is no longer the same girl we met at the beginning of the series. And that makes sense. By the third movie, she cannot just be running around with the same restless teenage energy forever. She has been through cases, danger, heartbreak, family complications, and the constant pressure of proving that she deserves to be taken seriously. So this film tries to move her into a more mature stage of life. You can feel that in the way the movie frames her. She's still quick, still stubborn, still playful in moments, but there is a different emotional weight around her now. She is not only trying to solve a case, she is also standing at the edge of a major personal change. Her relationship with Tewksbury is no longer just a charming romantic thread in the background. It has become part of the question of who she is going to be next. That is probably the part of her growth that works best. The film understands that growing up does not mean Enola has to become less herself. It does not try to erase her independence or turn her into a completely different character. Instead, it places her in a situation where she has to figure out whether love, commitment, and vulnerability can exist alongside the freedom she has always fought for. And honestly, that is a good direction for her, because Enola's journey was never just about proving that she could solve mysteries. It was also about proving that she had the right to choose her own life. In the first films, that meant resisting control. It meant refusing to be shaped by other people's expectations. In this third film, the choice becomes more personal. It is not simply, can Enola stand on her own? We already know she can. The question becomes, can she let someone stand beside her without feeling like she has lost herself? That is a more mature question. And when the movie focuses on that, Enola feels like she is genuinely growing. She is not just louder or more confident. She is more emotionally open. She has to deal with the idea that independence is not always the same thing as isolation. There is a softness in that, and it gives the character a little more texture than she might have had if the film had only repeated the same rebellious beats from before. At the same time, the film does not always handle this growth smoothly. There are moments where Enola's emotional maturity is clear, but her detective maturity feels less convincing, and that creates a strange imbalance. As a person, she seems to be moving forward. As an investigator, she sometimes feels stuck in the same pattern. She still reacts quickly, she still follows clues, she still throws herself into danger, but the movie does not always show her becoming sharper in the way a third chapter should. That is where the character growth feels incomplete. Emotionally, yes, she has changed, but professionally, as a detective, the film needed to show more. It needed to make us feel that Enola had learned from every previous case. That she was not just braver now, but smarter, more strategic, more controlled, more capable of seeing the whole board before everyone else does. Instead, the movie sometimes tells us she is extraordinary while giving her situations that do not fully prove it. Still, there is something satisfying about watching Enola step into a new chapter of her life. The film gives her a sense of closure that many fans wanted. She is not left wandering or unfinished. She reaches a point where her personal identity, her love story, and her future all come together in a way that feels meaningful for the character. And I think that is why some viewers were so happy with this movie, even if they admitted the mystery was not the strongest. They were not only watching for the case, they were watching for Enola. They wanted to see her happy. They wanted to see her choose love without being weakened by it. They wanted to see her grow into a version of herself that still had that spark, but also had more heart. On that level, the film does deliver. It may not give Enola the smartest mystery. It may not always show her deductive growth as clearly as it should, but it does understand that this chapter is about her becoming someone who can be independent and emotionally honest at the same time. And for a character who began by fighting so hard not to be controlled by anyone, that is a quietly important step, not perfect growth, but real enough to matter. Now, this is where Enola becomes a little frustrating in the third film. Because the movie keeps reminding us that she is clever. That is the whole foundation of the character. She is not just brave, not just rebellious, not just energetic. She is supposed to be sharp. She is a Holmes. Maybe not exactly like Sherlock, maybe not as cold or controlled, but still someone who sees patterns other people miss. And when the film lets her be that version of herself, she is fun to watch. The problem is that Enola Holmes 3 does not always protect her intelligence. There are moments where Enola makes choices that do not feel like mistakes from a smart person under pressure. They feel more like the script needed her to do something careless so the next scene could happen, and that is a very different thing. A character can make mistakes. In fact, they should. If Enola solved everything perfectly, never panicked, never misread anyone, and never got caught off guard, she would become boring. Flaws make her human, but the mistakes still need to match the character. They need to come from emotion, urgency, fear, pride, overconfidence, something believable. Here, some of her decisions just feel odd. There are situations where she gives up an advantage for no strong reason. There are dangerous moments where she does not respond with the urgency you would expect. There are times when she leaves a threat too open, almost as if she forgets the kind of danger she is dealing with. And for an ordinary adventure hero, maybe you could shrug that off. But for Enola Holmes, it stands out, because the movie is asking us to believe she is brilliant while showing us behavior that sometimes feels careless. That disconnect matters. If Enola is meant to be a genius detective, then her choices should reflect that even when she is emotional. She can be impulsive, sure. She can be bold. She can even be reckless in a way that fits her personality. But recklessness is not the same as stupidity. A smart, reckless character takes risks because she sees an opening. A badly written, reckless character takes risks because the story needs trouble. And too often, this film falls into the second category. It is especially noticeable because the mystery itself is already not pushing her hard enough. So when the case feels simple, and Enola still makes questionable decisions, the character starts to feel less impressive than she should. The movie wants us to cheer for her as this capable young detective, but it does not always give her the kind of clever problem-solving that would earn that reaction. That is probably why some viewers felt disappointed in her development. By the third film, Enola should be more experienced. She should have learned from earlier dangers. She should be better at reading people, anticipating traps, and staying composed when things go wrong. Instead, there are moments where she still behaves like someone stumbling through the plot, hoping the next clue appears in time, and that hurts the detective fantasy. The best version of Enola is not perfect. She is messy, emotional, funny, stubborn, and sometimes too quick to act. But underneath all of that, you should always feel the mind working. You should feel that even when she is scared, she is noticing. Even when she is angry, she is connecting details. Even when she is wrong in a way that makes sense. In Enola Holmes 3, that inner sharpness is not always visible. The film spends a lot of energy telling us who Enola is, but the stronger choice would have been to show it through smarter decisions. Let her set a trap. Let her read a room better than Sherlock in a way that feels earned. Let her use emotional intelligence as a detective skill, not just as part of her personality. Let her win because she understood something no one else did. That would have made her growth feel much stronger. Instead, we get a version of Enola who is still charming, still easy to like, still carried by Millie Bobby Brown's energy, but not always written with the intelligence the character deserves. And that is the frustrating part. You want to root for her, you do root for her, but every time she makes a careless choice that does not feel believable, the movie chips away at the idea that she is becoming a truly great detective. For this third film, Enola did not need to become Sherlock. She just needed to feel sharper than before, and too often, the writing holds her back from that. Millie Bobby Brown is still the main reason this franchise has a pulse. Even when Enola Holmes 3 is not working as smoothly as it should, she gives the movie a center. There is a kind of restless energy she brings to Enola that makes the character immediately recognizable. The quick expressions, the confidence, the impatience, the little flashes of humor, all of that is still there. You can feel why this role became so closely tied to her. And honestly, without her, this third film would probably feel a lot weaker. Because the story itself has problems. The mystery is not always gripping. The plot gets crowded. Some of the emotional beats do not land as strongly as they should, but Millie Bobby Brown keeps pushing the movie forward. She makes Enola feel alive even when the writing around her is doing something predictable. There is still charm in the way she plays her. She can move from playful to serious very quickly. One moment she is giving that direct, mischievous Enola energy, and the next she is trying to carry something more emotional. That shift is important in this movie because Enola is no longer just the rebellious younger sister trying to prove herself. She is stepping into a more mature stage of life, and Brown does understand that. She gives Enola more softness this time, especially when the story focuses on love, marriage, family, and the uncertainty of what comes next. That is where her performance works best. When Enola is caught between independence and vulnerability, Brown gives the character a real emotional warmth. She does not make Enola feel suddenly transformed into someone else. She still feels like the same person, just older, more open, and a little more aware of what she could lose. That kind of continuity matters in a third film. You want growth, but you still want to recognize the character you followed from the start. And in many scenes, she does carry that balance well. Her chemistry with the camera is also still a major part of the film's identity. The fourth wall narration may not feel as fresh as it once did, but Brown herself still knows how to sell it. She has a natural comfort in that direct address style, like Enola is letting the audience in on a private thought before anyone else in the room catches up. Even when the writing overuses the device, the performance keeps some of its personality intact. There is also a physical side to the role that deserves credit. The action, the movement, the stunts, the running around in this big adventure setting, she commits to it. You can tell she is not just standing in the center of the frame waiting for the plot to happen around her. She gives Enola momentum. She makes the character feel active, even when the actual detective work is not as clever as it should be. But the performance is not going to work for everyone, and this is where the criticism comes in. For some viewers, Brown pushes too hard in this movie. There are moments where the expressions get a little too big, the delivery feels a little too theatrical, or the emotional reaction seems louder than the scene really needs. The series has always had a heightened style, so some exaggeration is expected. Enola is not meant to be a quiet, restrained character. But in this third film, the tone around her is more mature and dramatic, so the bigger performance choices can stand out more. That contrast becomes especially noticeable when she shares scenes with actors who are playing things more quietly. Henry Cavill, for example, brings a very controlled softness to Sherlock. Louis Partridge has a gentler, more romantic energy as Tewksbury. Helena Bonham Carter has her own eccentric rhythm, but even that feels very specific. Against that ensemble, Brown's larger moments can sometimes feel slightly overplayed. Not always, but enough that you notice it. The real issue may not even be Brown herself. It may be that the film does not always know how much energy a scene needs. Sometimes it asks for playful Enola when the story should be more tense. Sometimes it asks for emotional weight, but gives her dialogue that feels too direct. Sometimes the movie wants her to be funny, dramatic, romantic, and heroic almost all at once, and that can make the performance feel busy. Still, even with those uneven moments, she remains the film's strongest anchor, because when Brown is locked into the right emotional register, she is genuinely engaging. She understands Enola's appeal. She understands the confidence, the stubbornness, the loneliness underneath the bravery, and the excitement of a young woman trying to choose her own life. That is not a small thing. A weaker lead performance would expose every flaw in the movie much more clearly. So yes, there are scenes where she could have dialed it back. There are moments where the performance feels bigger than the film can support. But there are also many moments where she is the reason the movie still feels watchable, even when the mystery is not pulling its weight. In the end, Millie Bobby Brown does not completely save Enola Holmes 3, because no actor can fully save a weak mystery or rushed writing. But she does keep Enola herself worth following, and for a franchise built so heavily around one character's personality, that still matters a lot. One of the more interesting choices in Enola Holmes 3 is what it tries to do with Sherlock. Because normally with Sherlock Holmes, you expect control, you expect sharpness. You expect the man who walks into a room and notices everything before anyone else even understands there is something to notice. That is the image built into the name. Sherlock is not just a character in these stories. He is almost a standard the whole detective world has to measure itself against. But this movie seems more interested in the person underneath that reputation. And honestly, that idea is not bad. Henry Cavill's Sherlock has always worked best when the film allows him to be quietly human. He is not playing Sherlock as a cold machine. There is warmth there, even if it is buried under restraint. He has that older brother energy where he clearly cares, but he does not always know how to express it without making the room slightly awkward. That has been one of the nicer touches in this version of the Holmes world. In the third film, the movie leans further into that. Sherlock feels more vulnerable here, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a way that makes him seem less untouchable. The film puts him in a position where he cannot simply stand above the case and solve everything from a distance. He is pulled into danger, into emotional pressure, and into moments where his relationship with Enola matters more than his reputation as a detective. For some viewers, that works really well. It gives Sherlock a softness that makes him feel more like a brother than a legend. And that is important because this franchise is not really built around Sherlock as the main hero. It is built around Enola trying to exist beside the weight of his name. So when Sherlock becomes more emotionally present, it gives their relationship a little more texture. He is not just the famous detective she has to challenge. He is family. There are moments, especially near the end, where Cavill's performance finds that emotional note nicely. He does not overplay it. He does not suddenly turn Sherlock into someone completely different. He keeps the quietness, the reserve, the sense of a man who has feelings but does not naturally know what to do with them. That restraint actually helps. It makes the emotional beats feel more believable than if the movie had pushed him into something overly sentimental. And I do think there is value in seeing Sherlock like this. A more human Sherlock can make the Holmes family dynamic stronger. It reminds us that intelligence does not protect someone from fear, attachment, or regret. It also gives Enola's journey a slightly warmer frame. She's not just trying to prove herself to a distant genius. She's trying to understand where she fits among people who love her in imperfect ways. That is the part I appreciate, but at the same time, this is where the film has to be very careful. Making Sherlock human is one thing, making him ineffective is another. And that is a line the movie does not always handle perfectly, but that becomes more of a problem in the next discussion. For now, focusing only on the emotional side, the idea itself has merit. Sherlock does not need to be emotionless to be Sherlock. He does not need to treat every personal relationship like an inconvenience. In this version of the story, it makes sense that Enola's presence would bring something out of him. She disrupts him, she challenges him, she makes him care in ways he cannot fully hide. And Cavill is good at showing that without turning it into a speech. Sometimes it is just in the way he looks at her. Sometimes it is in the way his calmness slips slightly. Sometimes it is in the way he seems caught between being the great Sherlock Holmes and being a brother who is genuinely affected by what is happening around him. Those moments give the movie some of its quieter emotional weight. The problem is that the film around him is not always strong enough to make that emotional material land fully. The mystery is shaky, the pacing has issues, and Sherlock's actual usefulness in the plot becomes questionable. So even when the emotional idea works, it is sitting inside a story that does not always support him properly. Still, I would not dismiss this side of the film completely, because in a franchise where Enola is growing, falling in love, and finding her own place, it makes sense for Sherlock to grow in a smaller, quieter way too. He does not need a huge transformation. He just needs to feel a little more open, a little less distant, and a little more aware that being brilliant is not the same thing as being connected, and that is what the movie is reaching for. It may not land perfectly in every scene, but there is something genuinely appealing about seeing Sherlock Holmes not just as the mind in the room, but as the brother in the room. A flawed brother, a guarded brother. But still, finally, a more human one. Now, showing Sherlock's emotional side is one thing, weakening him is something else. And unfortunately, Enola Holmes 3 sometimes pushes Sherlock a little too far in that direction. The film wants Enola to stand at the center of the story, which is completely fair. This is her franchise. She should be the emotional lead, the active hero, the character we are following. Nobody is asking for Sherlock to suddenly take over the movie, but there is a difference between keeping Sherlock in a supporting role and making him feel strangely ineffective. That is where the problem starts. Sherlock Holmes is not just another side character. The moment you put that name into a story, the audience brings certain expectations with it. He is supposed to be sharp. He is supposed to notice what others miss. Even when he is not the main focus, his presence should change the temperature of a scene. You should feel that if Sherlock is involved, the mystery has to work harder. In this film, he does not always get that treatment. Instead, he spends too much of the story feeling weakened, trapped, or pushed aside. The kidnapping angle is meant to create stakes, and on paper, that could work. Taking Sherlock out of his usual position of control could make him more vulnerable and give Enola a reason to step up. But the execution makes him look less like a legendary detective caught in a dangerous situation and more like a character the plot simply needed to remove. That is frustrating. Because if Sherlock is going to be kidnapped, fooled, or outmaneuvered, the movie has to make the threat feel brilliant enough to justify it. The villain should feel terrifyingly clever. The trap should feel unavoidable. The situation should make us think, okay, even Sherlock could have been caught by this. But that is not always the feeling here. Too often, Sherlock just seems surprisingly helpless. And when the world's greatest detective is made helpless without the story earning it, the audience notices. It does not make Enola look stronger. It makes the writing look weaker. That is the key point. A strong Enola does not require a weak Sherlock. The film could have shown both of them as intelligent in different ways. Sherlock could have been analytical, controlled, and strategic, while Enola could have been more instinctive, emotionally sharp, and unpredictable. That contrast would have made their dynamic richer. They do not need to compete for competence, but the movie sometimes acts as if Enola can only shine if Sherlock is dimmed, and that is a mistake. Because when Sherlock is wasted, the whole detective world loses credibility. If he cannot anticipate danger, if he cannot read the situation, if he cannot meaningfully affect the case, then what exactly is the story doing with him? At that point, he is not functioning as a legendary figure, a mentor, a rival intelligence, or even a properly useful supporting character. He is just there to be placed in danger. Henry Cavill still brings presence to the role. That is not really the issue. He has the calmness, the warmth, and the quiet authority that make this version of Sherlock watchable, but the script does not give him enough sharp material. It gives him emotional moments, yes, but not enough detective moments. And for Sherlock Holmes, that feels like half the character has been left outside the room. The strangest thing is that the movie clearly understands the value of Sherlock as a symbol. It uses his name, his reputation, his connection to Enola, and the weight he carries in this world. But then it does not let him fully live up to that weight. It wants the benefit of Sherlock Holmes without always writing Sherlock Holmes-level intelligence. That becomes even more noticeable because the mystery itself is already predictable. If the case were extremely clever, maybe Sherlock being caught off guard would feel more believable. But when the audience can see certain turns coming and Sherlock cannot, the imbalance becomes hard to ignore. Instead of thinking, wow, Moriarty is dangerous, you start thinking, why is Sherlock not sharper here? That is not the reaction a film wants. A better version of this story would have used Sherlock's vulnerability without reducing his mind. He could be emotionally shaken and still brilliant. He could be in danger and still observant. He could be trapped and still quietly working out the pieces before anyone realizes it. That would have made him feel human without making him feel wasted. Because the truth is, Sherlock does not need a huge amount of screen time to matter. He just needs the right scenes, a few moments of real deduction, a few moments where his intelligence changes the direction of the story, a few moments where Enola learns from him, challenges him, or even surpasses him in a way that feels earned. That would have been enough, but in Enola Holmes 3, Sherlock often feels underused in the exact area where he should be strongest. The movie gives him emotional vulnerability, which is interesting, but takes away too much of his effectiveness, which is damaging. And by the end, that becomes one of the film's most disappointing choices. Not because Sherlock needed to be the hero. He did not. But because if you're going to bring Sherlock Holmes into the story, even as a supporting figure, you have to let him feel like Sherlock Holmes. Here, too often, he feels like a famous name being moved around by the plot, instead of a brilliant mind shaping it. The Holmes family part of Enola Holmes 3 is interesting, because it is clearly one of the things the movie wants to matter. This franchise has never treated Enola like she exists completely on her own. Yes, she is independent. Yes, she is trying to build an identity outside of Sherlock's shadow, but the Holmes name is still a huge part of the story. It follows her everywhere. It affects how people see her, how she sees herself, and how much pressure sits on her shoulders. And by the third movie, you would expect that family legacy to feel even stronger. Because Enola is no longer just proving that she can survive without her brothers. She's now stepping into adulthood. She is making choices about love, marriage, danger, work, and the kind of life she actually wants. That is the perfect moment for a story to dig deeper into what being part of the Holmes family really means. The movie does touch on that. Sherlock's presence gives Enola's journey a familiar emotional anchor. His vulnerability creates a shift in their dynamic. For once, he is not only the older brother standing slightly above everything, observing from a distance. He becomes someone who can be affected, someone who can be pulled into danger, someone Enola has to care about in a more active way. That part has potential. It suggests that the Holmes family is not just a collection of brilliant minds. It is also a messy emotional structure, full of people who do not always know how to express care properly. And when the film leans into that, it gives the story a warmer feeling. Enola is not just chasing a case. She's also dealing with what it means to love difficult people, protect them, and still remain her own person. But the family side also feels incomplete. One thing that stands out is how certain Holmes family elements are either missing or barely used. Sherlock's brother being oddly left out makes the family picture feel smaller than it should. If the story is going to deal with Holmes' legacy, family pressure, and the emotional weight of Enola's place in that world, then it feels strange not to use the wider Holmes family more meaningfully. It is not that every character needs a huge role. That would make the film even more crowded than it already is, but absence can still be felt. And here, the absence is noticeable because the film keeps circling themes of family, identity, and legacy without fully expanding them. There is also the issue of the Holmes name itself. The movie benefits from it constantly. It uses Sherlock's reputation. It uses Enola's connection to that reputation. It uses the audience's familiarity with the idea of Holmes-level intelligence. But it does not always deliver the kind of sharpness that should come with that name. That becomes a problem because legacy is not just about references. It is about standard. If you are going to build a story around the Holmes family, then the thinking needs to feel clever. The case needs to feel worthy of them. The characters need to show why this name matters beyond branding. And in Enola Holmes 3, that does not always happen. The film wants Enola to represent a new kind of Holmes, and that is a strong idea. She is not Sherlock. She should not be Sherlock. Her intelligence can be more emotional, more instinctive, more connected to people. That difference is what makes her interesting, but the movie needed to define that contrast more clearly. It needed to show how Enola carries the family legacy while changing it. Instead, the legacy sometimes feels more like background decoration. Sherlock is there, but weakened. The wider family is underused. Enola is growing, but her detective development is not sharp enough. So the Holmes name remains important in theory, but the story does not always make it feel powerful in practice. The emotional ending helps a little. It gives Enola a sense of belonging, not just as a detective or as a romantic lead, but as someone whose life is finally coming together on her own terms. Her mother's presence adds warmth to that feeling. It reminds us that Enola's journey began with family, absence, independence, and the need to understand what love looks like when it does not fit ordinary rules. That is a nice full circle feeling. But still, I wanted more from the Holmes legacy in this film. Not more references, not more famous names, more meaning. What does it actually mean for Enola to be a Holmes now? Is she carrying the family name forward? Is she breaking away from it? Is she building something beside it? The movie gestures toward those questions, but it does not fully sit with them, and that is why this topic feels slightly underdeveloped. The Holmes family should give the third film emotional weight and intellectual identity. Instead, it gives the movie some warmth, some familiarity, and a few important connections, but not the deeper family complexity it could have had. For a franchise about a young woman trying to step out of a legendary shadow, Enola Holmes 3 needed to make that shadow feel sharper, heavier, and more personal. The film continues that balance with a lot of style. The costumes are elegant, detailed, and visually pleasing. They help maintain the Victorian atmosphere without making everything feel stiff or museum-like. There is still a sense of play in the way characters are dressed. The clothes contribute to the world, but they do not completely trap the characters inside formality. And then, of course, there are the wedding visuals. For many viewers, those scenes are among the most beautiful parts of the film. The location, the styling, the framing, the emotional mood, it all comes together in a way that clearly wants to feel special. And for fans who were invested in Enola and Tewkesbury, the beauty of those scenes matters. The film is not just giving them a plot point, it is giving them an image to remember. That is smart, because even if people forget some of the mystery details, they may remember the feeling of that ending. They may remember the setting, the costumes, the warmth, the look of the wedding, the sense that this story has arrived somewhere emotionally complete. Visuals can do that. They can help an ending feel more satisfying than the writing alone might have managed. The sets also deserve some credit. The movie keeps that polished period adventure feeling alive, with interiors and locations that feel carefully designed. There is a nice texture to the world, even when the story itself becomes too crowded. You can tell the production wants everything to feel lively and attractive, not dull or flat. And that matters because Enola Holmes has always had a slightly heightened reality. It is not trying to be a harsh, grim historical drama. It is a stylized version of the Victorian world, filtered through Enola's personality. The production design understands that. It gives us elegance, color, movement, and enough visual charm to keep the film from feeling too heavy. But there is also a small downside to how polished everything looks. Sometimes the movie is almost too clean. The visuals are beautiful, but that beauty can occasionally soften the sense of danger. When characters are running through chaos, facing violence, dealing with fire, kidnapping, and physical struggle, the world should feel a little rougher. The film wants adventure, but it also wants everyone and everything to remain visually perfect. That can make the danger feel less real. Still, as a visual experience, Enola Holmes 3 is easy to appreciate. The Malta setting gives the film freshness. The cinematography makes it feel broader and more cinematic. The costumes are stylish, the sets are polished, the wedding scenes have genuine beauty, and even viewers who were disappointed by the plot often found something to admire in how the movie looks. That is probably the fairest way to put it. The film may not always be clever enough as a mystery. It may not always be tight enough as a story. Imagine Enola's wedding scenes looking perfect because that moment is meant to feel emotionally complete, while the adventure before it gradually breaks down the polished image. That would make the final beauty feel earned. But when the film keeps everything too pristine throughout, the emotional and physical journey feels softer. This is not the biggest flaw in Enola Holmes 3. The mystery, the pacing, and the treatment of Sherlock are bigger problems. But the styling issue is one of those small things that quietly adds to the feeling that the movie is too controlled, too neat, and too protected from its own danger. You want to believe Enola has been through something. You want the adventure to leave a mark. And sometimes, the movie is so focused on making her look perfect that it forgets how powerful imperfection can be. Anytime a movie uses the Sherlock Holmes world, it automatically invites a different kind of attention, because this is not just any detective universe. These names come with history. Sherlock Moriarty, Irene Adler, Inspector Gregson, even people who have not read every original story usually understand that these characters carry a certain weight. They belong to a legacy of mystery, deduction, rivalry, intelligence, and carefully constructed reveals. So when Enola Holmes 3 starts bringing in more of that lore, it is both exciting and risky. On the positive side, there is something fun about seeing the film nod toward the larger Sherlock Holmes world. The references to classic characters give longtime fans little moments of recognition. They make the story feel more connected to a wider mythology, not just isolated inside Enola's personal journey. And when the film hints at Irene Adler or plays with names connected to the original stories, you can feel it trying to leave breadcrumbs for viewers who know the source material. Those touches can be enjoyable. They give the ending a bit of mystery beyond the immediate plot. They suggest that even if Enola's emotional journey has reached a satisfying place, the world around her still has more stories hiding in it. That is smart franchise building. You get closure, but also a little curiosity. You get a final chapter that still whispers, maybe there is another case somewhere. And for viewers who enjoy Easter eggs, those nods are probably one of the pleasures of the film. There is a small thrill in recognizing a name or sensing that the movie is setting up something familiar from the broader Holmes universe. It makes the film feel like it is playing with legacy, not just inventing everything from scratch. And because Enola herself exists in conversation with Sherlock's shadow, those connections make sense. But this is also where the film opens itself up to criticism, because referencing Sherlock Holmes' lore is not the same as honoring it. That is the difference some viewers will feel very strongly. You can use the names, you can bring in Moriarty, you can hint at Irene Adler, you can place Enola beside Sherlock and build a story around the Holmes family. But if the actual mystery does not feel clever, if the deductions do not feel earned, and if Sherlock himself does not feel sharp enough, then the references start to feel decorative. They become labels rather than substance. And that is where Enola Holmes 3 struggles. For fans of more traditional Sherlock Holmes stories, the frustration is understandable. Sherlock Holmes is supposed to represent a certain kind of intelligence on screen. Not just clever dialogue, not just dramatic names, actual observation, actual deduction. That feeling that someone has seen 10 steps ahead while everyone else is still standing at the starting line. This movie does not always deliver that feeling. Instead, it borrows pieces of the Holmes mythology while telling a story that is much softer, broader, and more modern in tone. Now, that is not automatically wrong. Adaptations do not have to copy the original material exactly. Enola's world has always been a different kind of Holmes story, lighter, more emotional, more playful, more focused on a young woman creating her own identity. That difference can work, but the problem is that once the film leans harder into famous Holmes elements, the audience naturally expects the writing to rise to that level. If Moriarty is involved, the villain needs to be more than theatrical. If Sherlock is involved, he needs to feel more than vulnerable. If the film is going to play near Irene Adler territory, then the intrigue should feel elegant, slippery, and hard to pin down. Instead, the movie sometimes feels like it wants the benefit of these names without the complexity that should come with them. That is why some viewers felt the adaptation choices were careless. Not because every change is automatically disrespectful, but because the film does not always seem interested in the detective discipline behind the Holmes legacy. It is more interested in adventure, romance, emotional closure, and modern commentary. Those things are not bad, but they do shift the movie away from what many people expect when they hear Sherlock Holmes. And for some fans, that shift is too much. There is also the issue of Moriarty. In classic Holmes storytelling, Moriarty is not just a villain. Moriarty is an idea, the hidden mind, the shadow intelligence, the person who can challenge Sherlock not through noise but through design. So when this film presents Moriarty in a more direct, physical, and sometimes exaggerated way, it naturally divides viewers. Some may enjoy the new interpretation. Others may feel that the name deserved more subtlety. The same goes for Sherlock himself. Making him more human is interesting, but making him seem ineffective weakens the legacy. If the movie wants to reshape the Holmes world around Enola, it should not need to diminish the original figure to do it. Enola can be brilliant in her own way without Sherlock looking foolish. The adaptation would feel stronger if it allowed both characters to exist at full strength. That is really the central tension. Enola Holmes 3 wants to honor the old world while building a new one. It wants to use classic names while telling a modern, emotionally driven story. It wants the audience to feel the excitement of Holmes' mythology, but it also wants Enola to remain the heart of everything. That balance is possible, but it requires sharper writing than this film often provides. The best version of this movie would have made the lore feel meaningful. Every reference would have added something to the mystery. Every classic name would have carried dramatic weight. Every adaptation choice would have felt deliberate, not just convenient. And most importantly, the story would have understood that Holmes' legacy is not only about who appears. It is about how the mystery feels. That is where the film falls short. The Easter eggs are fun. The nods are noticeable. The possibility of future stories is exciting for fans who want more. But the actual detective core is not strong enough to make the adaptation feel fully satisfying. So, if you are watching mainly as an Enola Holmes fan, these references may feel like enjoyable little bonuses. But if you are watching as a Sherlock Holmes fan, especially someone who cares about Doyle-style mystery and the traditional weight of these characters, you may find yourself frustrated. Because the movie uses the mythology, but it does not always capture the intelligence, tension, or elegance that made that mythology last. And that is the risk of playing in a famous world. The names can bring excitement, but they also bring standards, and Enola Holmes 3 does not always meet the standards those names create. So after everything, Enola Holmes 3 lands in a strange place. It is not a movie I would call completely bad because that feels unfair. There are things here that clearly work. The film has warmth, it has style, it has a few strong emotional moments. Millie Bobby Brown still gives Enola enough personality to keep her watchable, and the romance with Tewksbury gives longtime fans the kind of ending they were probably hoping for. But it is also not the strongest film in the trilogy. Not even close, honestly. The biggest issue is that the movie works better as emotional closure than as a mystery, and for a franchise carrying the Holmes name, that is a pretty big problem. If you came into this mainly wanting to see Enola and Tewksbury get their happy ending, you may walk away satisfied, maybe even really satisfied. The wedding, the family presence, the sense of Enola choosing love without losing herself, all of that gives the film a soft, heartfelt final note. But if you came for a clever case, sharp deduction, a dangerous villain, and that playful detective spark from the first two films, this one may leave you wanting more. That is the split right there. As a conclusion to Enola's emotional journey, the movie has value. As a mystery adventure, it feels undercooked, and that makes the rewatch value a little complicated too. Some fans will absolutely watch it again, especially if they are attached to the characters. There is comfort in returning to this world. The Malta setting is beautiful, the costumes are lovely, and the ending has that feel-good quality that can make a flawed movie easier to revisit. But for viewers who were disappointed by the plot, I do not think this is the kind of sequel that demands a second watch. Once you already know where the mystery is going, there is not much hidden underneath to rediscover. The clues are not layered enough, the villain is not mysterious enough, the twists do not feel strong enough to make you want to go back and catch what you missed, because honestly, there is not that much to miss. That is not me being cruel. That is just the issue with a predictable mystery. A great detective film gets better when you rewatch it because you notice the setup, you notice the small details, you see how carefully everything was planted. Here, the story is easier to consume than to revisit. It can be fun in the moment, especially for fans, but it does not have that deeper puzzle box quality. So for some people, this will be a sweet comfort watch. For others, it will be a one-time thing, and both reactions make sense. The movie also has this interesting feeling of being both an ending and not quite an ending. On one hand, it gives enough closure that the trilogy could stop here. Enola gets a major emotional milestone. Her relationship reaches a clear destination. The final scenes have that sense of completion, like the film is gently closing the book on this stage of her life. And if this really is the final movie, then at least it does not leave the audience completely stranded. That matters. There are so many franchise stories that keep teasing the next chapter and then never actually finish what they started. Enola Holmes 3 at least gives fans something complete enough to hold on to. It may not be the sharpest ending from a mystery perspective, but emotionally, it gives the characters a place to land. At the same time, the movie does not close the door all the way. There are hints and little nods that suggest another story could happen. The references to the larger Sherlock Holmes world, the sense that certain characters may still have more to do, and the way the ending leaves just enough air around the future, all of that makes it feel like a fourth film is possible. Maybe not guaranteed, but possible, and honestly, I would not be against another one, but only if the next film remembers what this one forgot. If there is another Enola Holmes movie, it needs a stronger case, not just more action. Not just a bigger location, not just more emotional milestones. It needs a mystery that actually challenges Enola. It needs clues that feel earned, a villain who feels smarter, and Sherlock used in a way that makes the Holmes name feel powerful again. Because the characters are still worth watching. The world still has charm, the actors still have enough appeal, but the writing has to sharpen up. That is really where I land on Enola Holmes 3. It is a polished, heartfelt, uneven sequel. It gives fans some of the things they wanted, especially on the emotional side. It has enough beauty and warmth to avoid feeling pointless, but it also loses too much of the cleverness, freshness, and mystery tension that made the earlier films more engaging. It is not a disaster. It is not a triumph either. It is the kind of sequel where you can enjoy the ending while still feeling disappointed by the journey. You can smile at Enola's happiness and still wish the case had been better. You can appreciate the performances and visuals while still noticing that the story needed more focus, more suspense, and more intelligence. And maybe that is the fairest final verdict. Enola Holmes 3 works if you watch it as a farewell to characters you already care about. It struggles if you watch it as a detective mystery. For longtime fans, there is enough heart here to make it worth watching. For casual viewers, it may be pleasant but forgettable. And for anyone who loved the first two mainly because of their clever, playful energy, this third chapter may feel like a softer, weaker ending than the series deserved. Still, it does give Enola closure. It gives her love. It gives her a future. And even though the mystery is not strong enough to make the film truly great, that emotional final note is probably why some fans will forgive it more than others.